with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus came to the territory of the Gadarenes, 2 demoniacs who were coming from the tombs met him. They were so savage that no one could travel by that road. They cried out, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the appointed time?" Some distance away, a herd of many swine was feeding. The demons pleaded with him, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go then." They came out and entered the swine, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea where they were drowned. The swineherds ran away, and when they came to the town, they reported everything, including what had happened to the demoniacs. Thereupon the whole town came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their district. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today's first reading, we hear about the sending away of Ishmael. And when we hear the story, the most obvious question that comes to our mind is, why did God allow Ishmael and Hagar to be so mistreated? It seems like Ishmael and Hagar are really the victims of the story. They're victims of the cruelty of the sins of another. Primarily the lack of trust on the part of Sarah, and then also the jealousy of Sarah. One of the things that's important to recognize when we read through the Bible is that often in the Bible, it seems that things are not quote-unquote fair or equal, or sometimes even just. And sometimes we don't really know why. But one of the things that theologians, and especially the church fathers, what they used to speak about in the scriptures was something called divine election. Meaning that God chooses who he wills. And it's not because God is trying to be unjust or unfair. It's because God has to choose specific people and specific instruments. Recognize that in the story of Hagar and Ishmael, it is not that God leaves them completely abandoned. The story of Hagar and Ishmael is actually a story of great success and redemption. Hagar began her life as a slave. She ends her life as the mother of a great nation, Ishmael. Ishmael becomes an ancestor to the Egyptians and to the Arabs, and has a great nation that comes from him. So even though there were some trials, in the end there was great redemption. So it's not as if God leaves them for nothing, but still, God chose Isaac instead of Ishmael. Why? It's not very clear the reason why. Many times in the Bible, it's not very clear the reason why. Why was Abel's sacrifice more pleasing than Cain's? Why did God choose Isaac over Ishmael or David over his brothers? God chooses who he wills. It's a great mystery of salvation history. Now, many people have speculated why God chose Isaac rather than Ishmael, and even though there's not a clear answer, I do think it's interesting. One of the things that the early church fathers used to talk about is that they focused on the name of Isaac. We know that names mean things in the scriptures. And oftentimes in the Old Testament, when God gives somebody a name, it is a foreshadowing of what is to come in the future. So like Joshua, right, the disciple of Moses. Joshua's name was originally Hosea. His name was changed to Joshua. Joshua is literally just the Hebrew version of the name Jesus. And so as a foreshadowing that Joshua was a prefigurement of Jesus. With Isaac, Isaac's name means laughter. And the early church fathers saw this as a foreshadowing of the resurrection. That in the ancient world, many times you had stories and plays and things like that were tragedies. But in Christianity, life becomes a comedy. That even though there is suffering, in the end there is redemption. Without Christ, there could be no resurrection, true everlasting hope. And so Isaac, as a type of Christ who, like Jesus, was willing to sacrifice his own life on the same mountain that Jesus was going to be sacrificed, Isaac is a prefigurement of Jesus. And even his name represents it, the name meaning laughter. That even Jesus, when he was on Calvary, when he was carrying his cross, at the forefront of his mind was he knew about the resurrection. He knew that his tragic current experience was going to end in a comedy. And there really is something special about that in the life of every Christian, that we should never lose sight of that. Too many times Christians talk about the modern secular culture and we talk about life as such a tragedy. Life also has redemption. It is a comedy. We shouldn't be discouraged. We shouldn't be walking around with our heads hanging low. There is resurrection. There is redemption. And our life ultimately is a comedy.